Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Epstein, and I'm the marketing specialist here for the TDA Perks program. And today's webinar topic is preventing embezzlement in the dental office. So we've got Phil Nieto here with Perks partner BestCard, and BestCard is the only credit card processing company that TDA Perks endorses. So they've been with us for almost 10 years, I think now. Before we get started, I want to let you know that right now we're looking at the TDA Perks website. You can come here, look at our programs. We've got over 25 plus endorsed vendors that are here to help your practice. So definitely come back and check that out. Also, we archive all of our webinars here that we're doing, that we do every month. You can find them in the articles and resource section of the site. Let's see, our next webinar is going to be in July, and it's going to focus on online marketing. So we're really excited for that, and specifically on how to validate your company's SEO performance. So I urge you to come back and register for that one as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the presentation to Phil. Okay, Phil.
Well, thanks a lot, Josh. Now, real quick, let me get the screen up. And are you seeing the correct screen, or do I need to swap the settings?
You need to. I'm not seeing that yet.
Okay, better? Is that correct?
Yes, I've got you. Perfect, man.
Perfect. All right. Well, my name is Phil Nieto. I'm with BestCard. We are a credit card processing company. A little background about us. We actually started off as a Colorado Dental Association in-house program years and years ago. And essentially from there, we've grown. We're now endorsed by 25 state dental associations. We work with thousands of dental offices around the country. And embezzlement is something that we actually, as a financial services company, actually are on the forefront of kind of detecting. We find at least a couple cases per year. So a little bit of background about me. I am BestCard's in-house attorney. I actually used to be a prosecutor for the county of Denver. So this is something that I have seen from both sides now, really on the, criminal justice side and on the, investigatory, these numbers don't add up side. So embezzlement in dental practices. It is an issue that is unfortunately common. There's a lot of different numbers about how likely you are to be embezzled, but the odds are that a lot of times embezzlement goes undetected, and really a big part of the reason for that is a lot of dentists don't have the tools or at least the know-how of even what they should be looking for to know if there's a problem going on in the practice. It's human nature that sometimes, as much as you try to hire the correct people, you will get people that take advantage of your goodwill, the opportunity you provided them. This is really on the side of, all right, if we're going to have embezzlement in the practice, it's something that exists, that's out there. What are the steps that you can take to really avoid it and, limit your exposure to it? So out of all of the industries in the U.S., healthcare accounts for 7% of embezzlement. You're the fourth largest industry. In that category, 60% of dental offices are estimated to actually be victims of embezzlement. According to an ADA study, 17.5% of dentists admitted to actually having embezzlement previously in their practice. The difference between those numbers is probably a mixture of the fact that sometimes people don't really have the tools that they need to detect what is going on with embezzlement. A lot of it is also just there's a little bit of shame with having money stolen from you. But really, at the end of the day, part of the goal is to get over that initial reaction of, being embarrassed and look at the, nuts and bolts of how you can prevent this from happening again. The average embezzlement, instance will usually take between 3 to 7% of revenue. So, for $1 million a year production practice, that is $30,000 to $70,000 per year. That ADA survey that I cited earlier stated that the average embezzlement was $18,174. Once again, the difference between those numbers is probably not so much a difference between it's a difference in what was reported versus what may have actually happened, because you may not have, followed all the correct avenues to really find the extent of the embezzlement. With embezzlement, there's a lot of ranges as far as what can actually, what are the identifiers that tend to lead people to embezzle. I mean, it's more likely to be women than men. Men tend to embezzle more money during embezzlement cases, but there are personality indicators that are kind of common when it comes to embezzlement. So on to the next slide. There we go. Sorry. So a couple numbers I really want to point out here. More than 40% of thefts were committed by an employee in the accounting or finance part of the business. For a dental office, I mean, you might not have a bunch of people working in your finance side. It might be one or two people, or maybe even it's just the office manager managing everything. It's that 40%, like I said, that's the person with the most opportunity to actually perpetrate embezzlement against you. 4 out of every 5 of the victims of embezzlement were small businesses. Once again, the biggest reason for that is you might have one person that's really running the show on the finance side without a lot of oversight. And without oversight, it just creates an opportunity for something to go wrong. The last one in the bottom right corner, 1 out of 3 cases involves multiple fraud methods. I think that's really important because a lot of times people find one thing and they might choose not to report it because they think that the impact is relatively minimal, when really there may have been much more going on than you're even aware of. And I can speak from experience in the embezzlement cases that we've had here that we've brought to doctors. It has almost always been the case that, we found that while we found the credit card processing fraud, they found that there was overbilling also going on, or, theft of identity of patients. So it's one of those things to really always be aware of, because if you don't report it, you're kind of not doing yourself or any of your fellow dentists any favors. As far as why is dental fraud so difficult to find? Probably the biggest reason is because, with a lot of businesses, you might have someone with an accounting or finance background. Dentists, on the other hand, they tend to want to be dentists. There's a reason you didn't choose to be accountants, right? On the one side of that, so a lot of dentists would rather be clinicians, be working with people than, really manage the nuts and bolts of running a business. So they might trust that to really, a person that will take care of it for them. And, not to say that every person that does that embezzles, the majority don't, but there is the opportunity there for something to, for action to be taken against you. A lot of other times, practice owners also don't have the training or experience to know what to look for when it comes to even potential embezzlement, or what steps they should be taking to prevent embezzlement. In the dental industry specifically, a lot of payments come from third parties like insurance. It's not always as easy to trace as, a retail store where this payment was for this item and they're out the door. Many dentists don't want to hire consultants or, accountants or auditors to basically review their practices and make sure that they don't see anything unusual. A lot of times if you have experience in that field, you will see discrepancies or unusual numbers oh, you have an unusually high number of returns. Well, let's dive into that number a little bit. If you don't have experience with other practices, you might just think that your numbers are normal when really it could be outside the norm. Last, when embezzlement occurs, often dentists are embarrassed and really don't want to report it to the authorities. That allows the embezzler to move on to a new practice. They won't list you in their employment history, but they'll go on and, do the same thing somewhere else. So as far as embezzlement, kind of, who's going to perpetrate it? The simple answer is that there's not a simple answer. Usually the average embezzler is extremely well liked by staff and patients. They're your go-getter employee that's really smart, that will handle a lot of things, that will take a lot of stuff on personally, that, it's really a take-charge person. They won't miss days. They'll work regularly. They'll stay late. They'll kind of give you their all. They'll make you think that they're kind of part of the family. The real problem with that is a lot of those, what would appear to be positive traits in an employee, the fact that they take charge and they're not going to miss a day, are actually because they can't afford to have other people looking over what has been going on in the office. So if they miss a day of work, all of a sudden, a patient might call in that's been overbilled and complain, and that's going to raise alarms. So, they are trying to do all the positive things. From the outside, it looks positive, but that doesn't always mean that that employee can be 100% trusted. So when we look at fraud, we kind of identify, all right, there's always 3 different confluent forces that lead to, fraud happening in the office. First is opportunity, then rationalization, and last is pressure. Pressure is kind of what we'll start off with. So pressure and rationalization, as much as you try, you will never be able to fully control these aspects. Pressure is, an economic need. They need to make bills. They have gambling addictions. They have, kids that are in the hospital. If there's an economic need, they are more likely to basically, look for other sources of income. Rationalization is kind of the next step. it's how they justify stealing from you. A lot of employees really don't plan to embezzle, and circumstances change, and all of a sudden, they undertake actions that you wouldn't even think possible from them. A lot of the rationalizations, is short term, and I'll pay back it. I'll kind of treat it as a loan and pay it back before anyone notices. Another one is, hey, the practice is doing really well, and I'm a big part of that. I deserve to make more than what I'm paid. At the end of the day, it's really, rationalization is not something that you're going to be able to control either. What you need to focus on is limiting opportunity. So the opportunity is really kind of, as a business owner, the part that you need to think about how your practice runs and make sure that you don't have just, an easy opportunity for somebody to embezzle from you. Samples of things that can make the opportunity more enticing is that if the doctor doesn't really focus on the financial aspects of the business, of course, that makes it less likely that they'll be found. Specifically, if the staff is small and has one person that handles all of the finances, that's the person with the most opportunity to embezzle from you. Last, if when you do your taxes, if you don't have any kind of overview as far as what are normal numbers and metrics for your industry, those are things where, the staff might realize, okay, there's not enough oversight to catch me. I think I can get away with this. If we look at what actually made dental offices suspect embezzlement, it's actually a confluence of a lot of factors. You look at these numbers and two things usually stand out. It's usually a combination of billing irregularities and then also suspicious behavior on the part of the employee. So in most of these cases, there was an instance that kind of brought something to light of, oh, this is unusual. I don't know why this would have been billed this way. And then an employee might be, defensive about it, or they might actually be, other employees might think that something else is going on with them, and, a refusal to kind of share information on the process of what's happening. So I always want to be really, really clear. If you were to see a situation like this, it doesn't automatically mean that there's embezzlement. You should really take kind of careful steps to address it and investigate it before accusing anyone of anything. But these are things that, if you see them, just know other offices have found that this led to them discovering embezzlement. So now the fun part. You're all dentists. You all have better things to do than think about how to embezzle money from your own business every day. But luckily, we've done that for you. It's really, really important to know, all right, if somebody was going to embezzle money, how would it show up? What are the types of schemes that, it would involve? Because that way you'll know, all right, if I see an extra billing to a patient, well, all right, that might not just be a mistake. That might be indicative of something more substantial. If we look at the actual common types of fraud schemes in the healthcare industry, the majority are billing based. Cash larceny is another one where, if you have cash on hand or loose cash, it's just not it's not audited to be accurate. Skimming is one that I'll go over. Payroll, overbilling for hours, and then expense reimbursement. We'll kind of go through all of those in order. So let's start with the billing scheme. Really common one, double billing patients. So a lot of patients don't exactly know how much they should expect to be charged. It might be something that, they heard and the number popped out of their head. So an ambitious embezzler might actually send a second invoice to a patient on your letterhead and say, oh, there's still a $75 fee to be paid. The patient might go ahead and pay that bill, and then that basically payment is going directly to the embezzler. So it doesn't exist on your books. But at the same time, the embezzler is able to make the patient think that it's something they have to pay. They'll just sign the check over to themselves. Generally, if you have a customer call because they have a duplicate payment, there are legitimate reasons why that can happen, whether it's staff error or duplication of work or anything like that. But it's not something that you should necessarily immediately write off, because it is a very, very common form of embezzlement. If they want to take it to another level, they'll actually create a merchant account with a name very similar to your name so that they can take credit card payments. So that they send a patient a bogus invoice for a bill that they don't owe. The patient chooses to pay with a credit card. Rather than have that run through your system in the office and have a record of an extra transaction, they set up a fake account in your name with your business information, your social security number, your credentials, but it's depositing to their bank account. It'd be almost impossible to track, and that's why we'll kind of get into a little bit later about how important it is to kind of cover your own personal data to prevent embezzlement as well. Churning is a really, really common method. Churning is actually really indicative. Normally, this is someone trying to make a short-term ends meet, and they borrow, they steal a little bit of money, and then sure enough, because accounts receivable keeps flowing in, they keep moving it from person to person. So think, they take a $90 payment that was made for the office, but then, the day sheet is $90 short, so they have to keep moving that money onto a different patient earnings account. It gets really convoluted. It tends to spiral into larger and larger amounts. But there are actually really easy ways to catch this regarding audit controls in your software that we'll get into later. Overbilling on dental claims. So a lot of patients with dental insurance don't really pay a lot of attention to what insurance pays out versus what they need to pay out of pocket. Essentially, an unscrupulous staff member can claim that insurance paid less than anticipated and then take the remainder of the overbilling as a cash payment, check payment, deposit to their own account. From your point of view, you've been paid by the insurance company, but the patient is actually going to be paying more than they should be based on the insurance remittance. Moving on to basically stealing petty cash, cash larceny is what it's called. A really common form is just pocketing petty cash because it's not closely accounted in the office. This can be more difficult to trace sometimes because there's not always a digital trail to follow. With an insurance remittance, there's going to be a claims file that you can look up. With a credit card payment, there's going to be a credit card transaction that can be pulled up later on. Petty cash, if it's not closely monitored every single day, it can just go missing, and there's not really an easy way to tell exactly where that happened in the process. We've even had this in some offices. We had a doctor's office who he was keeping a lot of cash in a drawer in the office because he was going through a divorce. Well, sure enough, not to say who it was in the office, but someone in the office stole the drawer. And, there's not really an insurance payout that's going to cover, loose cash in the office. Regarding a different type of embezzlement. So this is moving on to basically embezzling from payment methods. One of the most common is called skimming. Basically, an embezzler will improperly endorse a check that was made to the office. And so a personal check made to the office, they're going to endorse it over to their personal account. So, check made to Dr. Smith. Jane at the front desk writes it, paid to the order of Jane Doe, and it's basically from then on, she's deleting the entry in the dental software that shows the outstanding balance. So as far as the dental office, knows, if they're not taking a close look at it, they're net on their daily production. But at the same time, these deposits are being funded directly to the account. The office can even take it to the next level and create a bank account with a doing business as name really similar to the practice. And essentially can have you, control write-off receivables, even divert funds to that account that are meant to be made for paying bills, because you might not notice the difference between the two accounts. Gift card theft in the office. A lot of offices have, if you come in for your first visit, you get a $25 Amazon gift card or something like that as part of their marketing. If you're not keeping careful track, they can steal a stack of those cards and go out and, it's really not easy to trace a, one-time use gift card because you're probably not keeping track of all of those numbers. So it's something to be careful of. And like I said, it's more letting them know that you're actively checking the records of what you've spent versus what's supposed to be on hand. One office that we had recently called to change the bank accounts because they had a partner no longer show up to work. Sure enough, the next day, they went to the partner's house, and he had left town with over $1 million that was held in the bank account. That's really important because anytime that you have a bank account between multiple business partners for amounts over a certain value, like normally $10,000, you really want to have where it requires dual signatures or multiple signatures, depending on how many owners there are of the practice, to make sure that basically nobody is able to skim money from the business owner side. So I have a couple examples of different types of fraud that we've seen. So essentially, a patient called the office because they looked at the original bill that they'd gotten from their insurance company, and sure enough, they've been overbilled for the services that they provided. Since the office manager had never deposited the funds to the dentist account, essentially they had to keep moving money from account to account to keep ahead of their churn. The embezzler basically wanted to just do a refund out of their own personal account, and rather than asking like the doctor to sign a check or to do a return through any of the business accounts. Well, sure enough, this made the patient suspicious. And when they contacted the office, it turned out that this person had been embezzling money for more than 8 years. I believe in that case it was about $90,000 worth of embezzlement. Another one. So another long-term long-term employee. Best Card does really close analysis of all of our dental offices' return procedures. So say, for example, you take a return that's run to a different card than the original transaction, right? Normally, Best Card will actually reach out to you and say, hey, we noticed that this return wasn't matched to a prior sale. It's going to be held for 1 day, and we wanted to make sure that basically that it was correct with your team that this was to be run. Now, there are legitimate reasons why this can happen. Maybe the patient had a new card issued, right? But more often than not, we have caught multiple instances where somebody was basically running returns that were meant for patients that didn't know that they were supposed to receive them, right? So insurance paid more than expected. A remittance was owed back to the patient. Instead of like returning to the card for the patient, they were returning to their own personal credit card, or in this case, it was actually the credit cards of her boyfriend and his kids as well. So basically, they had multiple perpetrators. This one was basically over $30,000 in 4 years. It was a lot of legwork because, we had to basically track who each of these cards went to. But luckily, they did take this one to trial, and I believe they were very successful in that conviction. Checks. So if it's an office policy to write checks for refunds, an embezzler will basically not mail the reimbursement check. And if nobody complains for 1 month, they would basically endorse the check to themselves. It's not, like I said, it's not a low risk way of doing it because all it takes is one person to complain that they expected money and, they're outside that time frame. But, like I said, if you get complaints about unusual billing procedures, just take it seriously because in this case, I believe they had found out about this like 5 years before, but thought it had just been a training issue. And like I said, it took years to basically to trace that back. The last part about this actually, with returns to patients, you always want to return in the same method in which you accepted the original payment. So if a patient chose to pay with a credit card, you want to run the return to the credit card and not just cut a check. That basically, one, provides a better audit trail, and two, if they were to ever dispute the charge, you have a really clear transaction history that shows that that payment, had already been returned, rather than if it's a check, Visa isn't necessarily going to see that there was a return run to that account. So a patient could choose to dispute it, and all of a sudden you have to go through multiple steps to prove that the charge and the return were issued as authorized by the patient. This is one that's becoming more and more of a problem. So a lot of dental offices are really reluctant to change passwords to critical systems. I understand why it's annoying to have to remember 30 different passwords in any given day. But in this case, they had an employee that they had basically fired with cause. And over the next couple of months, they were seeing a lot of unauthorized returns that had been run on a virtual system of theirs. At the same time, I believe this same office also was seeing unusual withdrawals from their checking account, which had somebody had logged into the online system and ordered new checks for. Essentially, when we traced this back, like it was a spoofed IP address, so difficult to trace. And honestly, this one, even though they had a person that they suspected, they were never able to prove who the actual person was that was, causing this fraud. So the really important thing here is anytime that you have an employee leave, even under good circumstances, it is probably worth doing an update of passwords of critical systems to make sure that none of your information is being exploited in a way that you don't approve of. Payroll fraud. It's really easy, and especially if the embezzler is the person that runs the payroll, to overestimate their hours or to basically take advantage of 401k distributions and distribute more funds to themselves than would strictly be borne by the hours worked. It's even possible, like I said, it's happened in the past where they've had to deal with someone like a payroll company, those are very rare. But basically with payroll, you want to, periodically check and make sure that the hours worked square to the hours that you actually saw them in the practice. And like I said, 401k distributions should always go through the doctor, and honestly, any payroll check should go through a quick reconciliation by the doctor to make sure that all the numbers, are legitimate and just within the bounds of what seems, honest for the practice. We have had instances where we've heard that dental offices have had their prescription pads stolen, and then, they sell them or use them for, pain meds that they wouldn't be able to get elsewise. Last, these are two that actually we kind of see from time to time or hear about a lot. One is basically an office manager or embezzler using a business card for personal reasons. So, paying for things that, to the business because they know that the doctor doesn't check the statement closely. Really, at the end of the day, you always want to make sure that you do an honest accounting of your monthly bills. And if there are questions, follow up, because even if there's a perfectly innocuous reason for it, just the fact that you ask the question to the person that reconciles or does the financial auditing for your practice means that they know that it's less likely that they would get away with anything in the future. So it's preventing the opportunity is the biggest part of, preventing embezzlement in the practice. Another one we have seen where, and basically through embezzlement, they've stolen supplies from the business or even over-ordered supplies. And essentially, then they go and just sell those supplies on eBay or any other of the online platforms. So essentially, the dentist is buying more than they need, and then the employee is taking the extra, selling them for a personal profit. There's even other instances where they've worked with a rep for a supply company to falsify invoices that they knew the doctor would pay without taking too close of a look. So essentially, whenever you're ordering supplies, take a quick rundown of whether or not you actually need to order everything that's available on the invoice. So basically, a couple other, these are more on the side of like controls, making sure that embezzlers, if they can make checks payable to themselves, if they have a signature stamp of your own, makes it really easy to not even run anything by you. Similarly, if they're able to open like a similar name to your business, they can do some really creative overbilling by basically splitting payments that are, should be for the office. They'll split them between your office and the fake office that they've set up under a name similar to your own. So all of that leads to the point of, really what should you do if you suspect that there's something going on? The first and most important thing is monitor it carefully, investigate it, but don't make any accusations until you've had time to get all the facts. When it comes to monitoring, sometimes it's just as simple as saying the numbers don't add up or hearing things about unusual practices that don't seem right in the office. You want to discreetly monitor, and there's a lot of internal controls that you can kind of use that we'll get into. But basically, the biggest thing is, one, your suspicions may not be accurate, so don't go in accusing anyone of anything. And two, don't necessarily let them know that you're investigating it, because that gives them an opportunity to try to cover up their trail going back. We've had where, a dental office accused an employee of something, they destroyed all the records, and they weren't able to figure out the extent of the fraud that had been perpetrated. Usually like a checklist of like daily and monthly activity can help, but there's also ways that an embezzler could modify that to, if you're looking at your daily production report as far as, here's what we ran in credit cards, here's what we ran in checks, that doesn't mean that they can't change the logs in the software to show, a false amount that might be less in what you actually earn and what they claim that you earned than what you actually earned. Luckily, if you know your software and you know your systems, there are a lot of reports built into these systems designed to help business owners track down this type of, fraudulent practice. First and foremost, if you don't know your dental software and you don't know some of the basics on the financial side in that dental software, then you're really at the whim of somebody else who's telling you this is exactly, this is how it's managed. They have the ability to manipulate that information, and you wouldn't even know basically where to begin to kind of sort backwards and, track down if there was actually, illicit charges run or, funding diverted instead of to your banking account. So in the software, there are depending on what software you use, there's of course many different ways to get there. I mean, Dentrix has different controls than Open Dental does. But at the same time, there's reports that are really generated so that you can understand like the basics of what you're running in transaction totals. But the most important part is that you should the doctor and the doctor only should have access to the audit controls in the software. So basically, audit controls are something that you can choose to turn on in almost every dental software out there that will track every single change to a billing ledger. So say, the patient originally received a cleaning and all of a sudden $30 got written off. You might not see it on the surface level report because it's only showing you what is expected to be, accounts receivable or, anything like that. But with audit controls turned on, you would be able to see each change that was made to that ledger entry, including write-offs. And like I said, if you saw something that didn't seem right, you don't necessarily accuse anyone of it, but at the same time, you definitely want to ask and kind of trace back that activity, make sure that you're not seeing it on a lot of accounts. It's not uncommon for, a patient to request a refund and for the office to maybe just delete the original entry because it was the same day. But at the same time, if you're seeing a lot of deleted entries and the numbers aren't quite adding up to what you expect them to be, it's a really good place to start to look at the audit controls. Once you have those audit controls, you want to basically balance your books. If you look at the practice management software deposit activity, you want to basically balance that to your own bank statement, which we'll get into, but you always want to have that bank statement directly delivered to you, not to the practice. But basically, even if you're doing a spot check of, all right, 3 times a month, you check the daily report and make sure that squares to the deposit, and you let your staff know, once again, you're preventing at least the appearance of an opportunity. If they know that this is something that you're actively looking at, they're less likely to think they can get away with it and less likely to embezzle. Tracking patient write-offs is something we talked about via the audit reports. The last part is as far as protecting your bank account, you always want to have statements sent home, not to the office. Once again, it's just splitting responsibilities between multiple parties so that one person doesn't have all of the opportunity to embezzle against your practice. Same with your online accounts, bank accounts. That is a password that you probably want to keep to yourself and yourself only. You can sign them in the instance that they have to square to a deposit, but at the same time, you don't want the entire staff knowing how to log into your business bank account. Before signing off on checks, review the front and back, make sure that they're actually made out correctly to your business, that the deposit is going to your account. And then last, you want to sign checks by hand because having a signature stamp available just makes it more easy for them to bypass you in the process of basically funding illicit checks. Last, as far as protecting your identity, it is really important that you kind of keep all of your personal identity separate from the office. I will tell you, most of the offices we work with, we have to require a social security number to board any credit card processing account. And I'm always a little bit surprised at, most dental office managers will have the doctor's social on hand. They'll have the EIN number for the business on hand. They'll have all of the bank account information on hand. There's really not, like I said, it slows down a few processes, a very small amount, to have them have to go through you to get that information. But the peace of mind of being in control of your own information, should someone leave on bad terms, is really, I think, a big benefit that a lot of times people overlook just for the ease of taking care of something quickly. As far as your monthly credit card processing statements, this is something that we know really well. You always want to take a look and make sure that basically you don't see an unusual number of returns. To give you an example, the average dental office, and we work with thousands of dental offices nationwide, returns about 0.5% of transactions. So 1 out of every 200 transactions is basically a return. Now, there are reasons why that might be a little bit different. If you would rather bill at the time of service and then remit funding back for an insurance claim. But generally, anything over 2% is going to be pretty unusual in the practice. So if you're seeing a lot of returns, you might take a close look at whether or not those are returns that are being run back to cards that you'd previously run. Like I said, it's something that we monitor pretty closely because we have caught fraud in this area in the past. But at the same time, depending on who your credit card processor is, it might not be something that they monitor or inform you of at all, and you kind of have to be your own advocate in taking a close look at it. Last, as far as using a CPA or a practice management consultant, part of the benefit that they bring to the table is that they have, it's the best way to say it, they have a good understanding of how most practices operate. So if you see really high, receivables or an excessive number of write-offs, or your supplies or payroll don't really square to your size of office, that type of person with the experience and that background will be able to say, hey, why are we ordering 3 times as many gloves as most practices with one doctor use, right? So from time to time, it may be worth having someone review in-office procedures. Like I said, it's not so much that you necessarily immediately think that there's an issue going on, but just preventing the possibility, letting staff know, hey, this is something that we look at, goes a long ways to stopping fraud. So institute controls in your office. Dual controls are always ideal. If you can basically split responsibilities for maybe receiving payments and reconciling the payments between 2 different staff members, that's going to make it, like I said, they would have to work together to defraud you, and that just makes it less and less likely. Basically, the worst case scenario is that you have the same person doing all of the financials for your practice because that person has all of the opportunity to do something, incorrect. If it's not possible with the size of the practice, at least you should be doing spot checks regularly to make sure that essentially, like I said, you're going to be your own dual controls. You're going to make sure that the audit trail and that the deposits match up to the accounts receivables. And if there's anything unusual, at least it gives you an opportunity to track it down a little bit. So I guess the perception that you're monitoring business activities can be enough to deter potential embezzling. If it involves collusion, more than one staff or outside vendors, it's more difficult to catch, but it's also much more difficult to continually perpetrate. If you change your passwords when staff leave your employment, you kind of prevent the access to someone that no longer has maybe the best interest of the practice at heart. And also be aware that identity theft for your patients, it may not hurt your pocketbook individually, but it can harm your practice's reputation. HIPAA fines in particular can be pretty extensive. So keeping controls on access to information in the office is really important. I mean, there's a reason that HIPAA exists and that it's something that practices have to comply with. Any type of regulation can be really cumbersome, but at the same time, the opportunity that your staff has to reach out and steal identity from hundreds of your patients is something that you can't just shrug off at the same time. It's estimated that 79% of dental embezzlement goes unreported. So basically, this allows the person to hop over to a new office and basically do the exact same thing to someone down the street. The way I always put it to offices is, if someone robbed your house, you would of course file a police report. This is somebody robbing your business for potentially tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you really owe it to yourself and to people in your profession to make sure that it is something that is treated seriously and fully investigated. I think part of the reason it's also unreported is that a lot of people don't understand the scope of activities and just want the issue to kind of fade away. Like I said, it's a substantial loss of revenue to you, and you should treat it like somebody robbed your house. So if you're looking for your action plan on embezzlement, you have kind of 3 steps. 1, get involved in your practice. Make sure you understand your systems. Make sure that your staff knows that this is something that you're periodically reconciling. If they know that you're actively involved in kind of managing and overseeing the practice, they're a lot less likely to try anything and a lot less likely to get away with it in the long run. Now, just because it comes up a lot, remember earlier we mentioned that embezzlement tends to go hand in hand with several different types of fraud. So I mentioned these because they're pretty big problems that actually pop up kind of hand in hand with embezzlement. Identity theft. So you may not know this, but you can steal a credit card number and sell it on the black market for about $1. Patient records go for 50 times that. So essentially, medical records in the office, realize that is something that is a potential liability and something that needs to be handled securely. Most dental softwares are getting better about this, having controls to prevent exporting data, but a lot of physical controls in the office. It's up to you to make sure that nobody's taking file folders of patient data home. One of the things that we've seen, so Jennifer, our owner, used to be a former employee at the Colorado Dental Association. The CDA actually had a doctor call nervous because it turns out a former employee, he got a call about a former employee, and they had boxes and boxes of patient data in their house. They've basically been working, moving practice to practice, running a very successful identity theft ring by stealing the information directly from dentists. That employee had been very well liked, very proactive, but at the time of the arrest, they basically had made enough money that they had an entire second home in California that they'd purchased with with money from the stolen data. In the last couple of years, we've actually had a couple instances here where we will get calls from people claiming to be dentists and having dentists' actual personal information, social security number, all of that, where they're trying to open a fake merchant account and basically run stolen credit cards under that doctor's name. So they run stolen credit cards to their bank account, close the bank account, and then basically the doctor's left holding the bag for the fraud. Now, in this case, basically the doctor wouldn't be the one holding the fraud, but it would negatively affect their credit report. But this is something that, like I said, with all of the data breaches going on out there, you should at least have a hawk alert set up through one of the 3 major credit bureaus on your personal information. Because if dentists generally running a successful business, you're going to have more access to credit than your average person, and that just makes you a bigger opportunity for anyone looking to perpetrate fraud. So in this case, this is 2 checks from what appear to be different banks, but to the same bank account and routing number, that basically were for fraudulent doctors, I put that in air quotes, who also owned a drywall business or an electric company that really had nothing to do with them. So this was somebody trying to set up a fake merchant account with somebody else's information. So we'll kind of data breaches, I think it's pretty well known that is something that has been more and more of a problem in the last couple of years. Hacking, skimming, phishing, especially in dental practices. I know a lot of practices that, now take a day out of the month to reiterate to staff or train new staff on, these are the type of emails that you need to be aware of. There are a lot of tools for that, but just know, with the amount of information that you have, you are always going to be a potential target for that type of fraud. Last, as far as in our own backyard, credit card processing fraud, you remember a couple of years ago, it switched to EMV chip cards versus the old magnetic stripe cards. The EMV chip cards have actually been very, very, very successful at preventing in-person fraud with credit cards. So what has happened is that a lot of the credit card processing fraud has moved online, basically using stolen cards for online purchases. Even more than that, like I said, the big one that we're seeing is people trying to set up fake merchant accounts so that rather than getting $10,000 worth of goods, it's $10,000 worth of deposits to a bank account that then they can leave with. So while EMV has helped, it obviously hasn't completely fixed the credit card processing fraud, scenario. So I guess in summary, the last thing we would like to say is, while most people are honest and most employees are really good at, showing up every day, putting in the hard work, you need to protect your practice as best you can. It's your name on the door. It's, your livelihood at stake. You have a lot of tools available to you with a little bit of training. I mean, you can call your dental software company and they'll be happy to train you on the audit tools that are built into their software. With a little bit of training, you can do a lot to really make sure that you're not going to be a source of unintended income to anyone looking to embezzle from you. Last, and this is just in my own personal experience, if you are a victim of fraud, whether it's embezzlement, stealing, identity theft, always report it to the authorities, because otherwise it just allows the person to move on and do the same thing to, the doctor office down the street that may not even know that that you had an issue with this employee. So opening it up, are there any questions? I know we kind of went through a lot at a very high level, but I would love to, if there's any questions I can answer, I'd love to help out.
Yeah, definitely. Phil, that was a great job. I see a few different questions kind of coming in here right now. So let's, again, if you want to add some questions to the question box there, I'll be sure to have them answered, and we have plenty of time for that. So actually I have a couple of questions in that I'm looking at, and here's the first one, Phil. Is there any kind of centralized database of embezzlers that I can check as part of the hiring process?
So
do I need to have permission to run a background check on that?
Okay.
You get it?
So as far as background checks, so basically a background check is what you want to do. All of the three major credit bureaus, so Experian, TransUnion, I'm forgetting one, they all actually will do criminal background checks. Now, actually, this is something I actually looked up in the state of Texas recently for a doctor's office that we were working with. In the state of Texas, you have the option to basically, for any job that's paid less than $75,000 a year, you have the option to provide do a background check for up to 7 years prior to the date of the background check, without requiring any kind of notice to the the person that you're looking to hire or your current employee. If it's more than $75, you can do a full background check, or $75,000. You can go do a full background check back to when they were 18 without notice. The biggest thing I'd say there, though, is you always want to make sure that you check with your own employment records and follow your own employment kind of regulations, because, like I said, this is something I looked up for an office, but I believe that in Texas that is the rule. Some states do require that you notify any potential employee or current employee before performing a background check, so it's really important to kind of check the state law with the state that you're in. But Texas is a little more lenient than some others.
Okay. So next question here. So if I suspect embezzlement in my practice, what would be the best steps to take to investigate and address the problem?
So that's actually a really good question. There are a couple different companies that even specialize in basically investigating dental embezzlement. Generally, you have a couple options. Basically, after you've done your own kind of cursory review, if you feel, okay, there's unusual things here, but I'm not sure I have the skill set to really dive in and figure out the extent of it, there are basically auditing firms that will basically take your software, log in, make sure that they track down kind of where every penny goes, and essentially, if there is embezzlement, they will find it. Sometimes that can also be managed if you have an attorney that you use for the practice. That can be managed through the attorney. Part of the benefit to that is you don't waive you have attorney-client privilege for the substance of that investigation. So if it doesn't show anything, obviously that's fine. But if it does show anything, you don't have to necessarily share all of your conversations with your attorney as part of any criminal proceeding. But generally, you always want to investigate it before filing a police report, because if you file a police report, they expect there to be a certain amount of evidence to back up your claim that there may be embezzlement going on. If you do find embezzlement, like I said, I strongly recommend that you do report it to the police, and they'll do their own concurrent investigation using some of the information that you brought up.
Okay. Let's see. Again, just you can type your questions into this question box over here, and we have plenty of time to answer them. Oh, we've got another one. So if I'm a victim of embezzlement, what are the chances of any kind of recovery? So is there a way to guarantee that I'll be reimbursed?
On the guarantee side, it's a little bit difficult. You can request an addition to your general liability policy for your business that covers embezzlement losses. What my understanding of those is that generally they're relatively limited in scope and what the payout is. So normally, I think we covered, the average embezzlement loss is about $20,000 reported, about $60,000 estimated. Most of those policies, cover up to $10,000. So you can't really guarantee from an insurance policy that you're going to be made whole. As part of a criminal or civil proceedings, and you have access to both, I want to be really clear, there may be restitution that is demanded. What I'll say, though, unfortunately, a lot of times with those cases, the money is already spent. There's not always a lot to recover in assets from someone that's been stealing from you. So, prevention is always going to be the best policy, because, once the money's gone, and if they've spent it, there's really nothing to recoup.
Okay. looks like that might be it for questions. Again, we have plenty of time, so if you need to ask a question of Phil, just type it in there, and we have a few. Okay. Well, Phil, we appreciate your time. This is really important information, and we appreciate everyone being here, taking the time out of their day. Again, if you have any questions for Phil, Phil, what's the best number? Is that the best number to reach out, obviously? 877-739-3952.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing,
And
Phil, before... Yes,
I was going to say, yeah, I'm always available, so...
Okay. Before you go, too, can you talk a little bit more about, some of what you guys offer as far as what I think is great that you guys do is the confidential cost comparison. That's just something that, I think is a great member benefit. Just, quickly touch on that.
Yeah. We've been a credit card processor for, 12 years as a private company. As I mentioned, we originally started off as part of the Colorado Dental Association. So dentists are who we work with. We have a really good knowledge of your dental systems and stuff. Normally what we'll do is if you want to see what we can do for you on credit card processing, if you send in a recent statement, we'll do an apples to apples comparison and just say, all right, for every credit card that you ran, here's what you paid. Here's exactly what it would have been with us for the same month. And the average office, we save, I think it's $2,765 per year on credit card processing fees. That's actually going way up in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of acquisitions in our industry. So our average office pays an effective rate of all fees paid divided by all dollars processed of 2.1%. The average dental office that we see now pays more than 3% in credit card processing fees. So it's one of those things where you may be paying, 50% more in your monthly bill than you really need to be. On top of that, we even have some really cool online systems that will automatically post payments directly into some of the most popular dental softwares out there. So a lot of times we can not only beat the cost that you're currently paying, and the cost stays low because we guarantee those rates through our endorsement from the TDA Perks program. But on top of that, we can match the system that you're already using so that you don't really lose any of the ease of use or the productivity that you come to expect in the office.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So again, if you have any questions regarding TDA Perks and any of our endorsed vendors, you can give me a call here at the TDA. I'm Josh. That's 512-443-3675. My email is josh@tda.org. And again, we appreciate you being with us. Thank you very much, Phil. And I want everyone to have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks for having us. Bye.